Good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever time you're actually watching this. We are doing chapter 5, lesson 7b today, which is the same thing. We're gonna talk about subtracting linear expressions, but today instead of just straight subtracting, we're gonna use something called the additive inverse. Okay, and so that's your learning target. Is I know how to subtract linear expressions by changing the problem to an addition problem and then solving. So before we go into anything, we need to first understand what in the world is the additive inverse mean. And your learning target kind of played with it a little bit, but the additive inverse is what you need to add to a number to get to 0. So for example, if we had the number -4, I would need to add 4 to it to get to 0. Okay, that's a straight example of you have a number, you add 4, what does that equal? That equals 0. So whatever number you need to add to something to get it to be 0. So let's go over the key concept here of how, in order to subtract linear expressions using the additive inverse, the first thing you need to do is make it an addition problem by multiplying the second linear expression by -1. Okay, that's going to completely change everything that that expression is, and that's how you find the additive inverse of a linear expression. The second thing is then add the two linear expressions using what we know about adding linear expressions from previous lessons. Okay, so before we subtracted linear expressions, we added linear expressions, and that's exactly what you have to do. Is once you multiply by -1, make it, or find the second linear expression as or the additive inverse of that second linear expression, then you can just add them like we normally did before. So let's do a few examples to kind of get a hold of this. Alright, example 1 says to find 12x plus 8 minus a -4x plus 5. So the first thing we need to do is we need to multiply this right here by a -1. So I'm going to rewrite this whole problem as 12x plus 8. I'm going to do that, what we had, and I'm going to add it to, and if I take a -4x plus 5, if I multiply that by a -1, and I distribute that -1 throughout, -1 times a -4x is equal to 4x, and -1 times a +5 is a -5. Okay, so 4x minus 5 is the additive inverse of -4x plus 5. Okay, so now I can plug this back into my expression over here, and I can add it to 4x plus 5. Now we just have an addition expression. Now we can simplify it. So I'm going to simplify it by writing my first term, 12x plus 8, and I'm going to add that to 4x plus 5. And I know there's a few different ways that we can add addition expressions. Remember, I could have just reordered it so that the terms were together, 12x and 4x, and then 8 and 5. A lot of people, I think, enjoy this method, so we're going to do that. And now this adding becomes easy. 12 plus 4 is 16x, and 8 plus 5 is just 13. And we have solved. Okay, let's do example 2. Alright, example 2 says, a coffee shop wants to know how many more lattes than mochas were sold last month. The number of lattes sold is represented by the expression 3c plus 4, and the number of mochas sold is represented by the expression 5c minus 2. So we need to write an expression to show how many more lattes were sold than mochas. Then evaluate the expression if c equals 12. So this is a two-part question. First, we need to evaluate how many more lattes were sold than mochas. And to do that, how many more? That means we are subtracting 3c plus 4 minus 5c minus 2. Okay, so again, I'm going to rewrite this expression as an addition statement. So I'm going to have 3c plus 4. And I'm going to add it to whatever the negative or the additive inverse of this 5c minus 2 is. So I'm going to take 5c minus 2 I'm going to multiply that by -1 and distribute the -1 in. -1 times a negative, or times a 5c is equal to -5c. And -1 times a -2 is just a +2. And so we end up adding that to -5c plus 2. If you'll notice here, the things that are differences, the positive ones become negative and the negative ones become positive. So if it helps any of you out, you can kind of skip this step and just go into switching those signs. Okay, so now we can add them. I'm going to take 3c plus 4, and I'm going to add that to a -5c plus 2. And 3 plus a -5 is a -2c. 4 plus 2 is 6. And we're left with -2c plus 6 as our final answer. And this is how you subtract linear expressions using the additive inverse. Yay, yay, yay. Hooray.